my hope with this next hour here is that coaches gain absolutely nothing specific out of this presentation. I hope you write almost nothing down. I hope you get no plays. And I hope that there's nothing actually specific you will take to your team. What I do hope is that you question. And you question yourselves, and you question some things you do, and you stimulate some thinking about how you do things. Because I think that's where the real value that some of these things can come across. I think us as coaches, we all want to steal things, and we all do steal things, I think, and it's just the nature of it. And I think that's certainly a valuable tool. But I think one of the weaknesses of having all the access we have to online resources, to video, to basketball from around the world, to coaches and clinics just like this, is that sometimes we take and we don't necessarily learn how to apply. I'll share a quick story that I shared on a previous clinic, I don't know, it was a couple months ago, and that I think applies in one of the greatest professional development opportunities I've ever had. Was something I just created for myself. And I was able to, through a friend, we got an actual copy of Tech's Winners Triangle Offense in the, I guess it would have been mid-90s or so. And actual copy that Tech sent us himself. And I took a summer and broke down the offense entirely into every part you can imagine. And I actually wrote a paper about how I would adapt that offense to a high school system, and how I would break it down, and how I would teach it. And most of the stuff I did there, if I were to look back on it now, would probably be complete garbage and wouldn't be all that worthwhile. But the process of doing that, I think, was invaluable for me to grow as a coach in terms of how do I adapt to what I'm doing. And I think so. One of the weaknesses, as I mentioned, of getting all these things, and we get stuff from NBA coaches now, is we don't have their roster. You don't have the players that they have. But there are things that you can take that I think can still be valuable to your team. You just have to learn how to apply them and sort of, learn from your failures and learn from your mistakes and sort of what works. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of terms of what I started to steal and why it didn't work for me, and then how we made adjustments to try to make it work. And again, some of these adjustments might not work for you, but I want to start challenging your thinking a little bit in terms of how that works for you. So again, this is what I talked about in terms of stimulating, adapting, to your own offense. Again, their stuff isn't yours and shouldn't be. I think these are the key questions we have to start asking is within your own team, what are the weaknesses of your roster? Meaning, where are you lacking? Where are the things you have to hide? Where are the things you have to exploit? How are teams going to defend you? And how can you take advantage of that? I think my very first year coaching high school, I coached high school for 14 years before I became a college coach. And my very first year, and I didn't know what I was doing. I had a really respected high school coach that I trusted a lot. He said to me, he said, the key thing you're trying to do on offense is put your players in places on the floor that they are going to be successful. And I don't think we can do that by stealing someone else's stuff necessarily, wrote exactly as it were. We need to kind of adjust to our rosters a little bit. Then I want you to ask, what would your offense look like if you put your players in different positions than they are now? Not only would it look like for them, but what would it look like for the other team? What would the defensive coverages, how would they change? How would the rotations change? How would the execution of your offense change, and the opportunities that you get from the things you run change if you were to sort of change the spacing just a little bit? So I'm going to go through a few kind of examples. Some of them are good, some of them bad, some NBA, some college level, and I'll sort of kind of go with a little bit here. You'll go. I just got to change here to some video. So here's a classic. I guess 15 years ago, you would have run a pick and roll, a mid pick and roll. and some spacing that may have happened in a mid pick and roll spacing. Okay, so we have a classic high mid pick and roll, 2 people out, another player in the low block, maybe a spacing you may not necessarily happen today, and a really common thing might have been what we called a yo-yo action. So this is something a lot of coaches may run. The only thing they might do is not have this player, but maybe stand beside the ref here, right? Where we would bring the opposite post high and yo-yo, and we would look to get a high-low action out of that or make a play. This offense may have worked very well for a better team, for better players, for different players in that situation. In this situation, this player coming to the high post cannot shoot the ball. So I guess the question would be, why would this player underneath go with him? Why would he guard him? It's an action that would work well for another team, but wouldn't work well for this team, and didn't here. This player doesn't trust that player to do anything with it. He hucks up a bad shot because the spacing is good. That team got nothing out of it. So we've got to take this further, right? So we might want to look at a short pick and roll. So short action, something done really commonly in the NBA. They've gotten away from it, I'd say, a little bit. Portland Trail Blazers ran a lot of short action, and some of their thumb action was sort of their ending series. I've run a lot of thumb action. So looking at it on a whiteboard, okay, or what I have is a whiteboard here, a short action would be something like this that we ran 5 years ago, where we would bring that post player to a mid-post area in here. We'd come off it here, we'd try to hit them on it, and now it's a pretty easy situation where the 4, who's a decision maker in this position, has a choice between a 5 rolling or a skip to a 2. Pretty easy, something you would have seen, something I watched the Phoenix Suns do to great success and thought, wow, that's something I need to do with my team. That seems to work really well. And it does work really well. If Steve Nash is your point guard, if Grant Hill's in the mid post, if Boris Diaw's in the mid post, if Mari Stoudemire is the roller, you don't have those guys. So this is what it might look like. Again, a video credit here to Zach Boisvert, who's got a great online channel. Some clips I've stolen here from him.
D'Antoni, 7 seconds or less Phoenix teams.
Right. So you see the 2 primary reads. We've hit a mid post. He's hit a roll. This time he skipped it. Why did this play work? Well, it worked mainly because Steve Nash is one of the greatest shooters of all time, and this hedge has to happen. So this guy's got to come out far to get Steve. That opens up this player at the elbow or the mid post. That makes everything happen. Not many of you have Steve Nash on your roster. Maybe this hedge doesn't happen. So I know last year with the national team, we started looking at actions like this a little bit, and we started thinking, do we give the players a choice? Do we come short in the dunker spot? Do we come up to the mid post? Do we have them post? Can they make that read on the fly? Do we have to tell them based on what the defensive coverage is? How can we kind of react a little bit to this? So you've got to adjust it to your roster. I'll let this play out a little bit.
Here you see some ping passing.
Now you got another example here. This one's a little bit lower. Again, it's a great execution of a short roll or a roll, what my friend Scott Morrison calls a ROP, right? Where he hits the not quite a pop, not quite a roll guy, and he touch passes to a lob for a dunk. Now, I don't know about your roster. I don't have Dwight Howard on my roster to catch that lob. What can we do? So we tried to look at adapting the spacing for your team. Here's a few examples. This is from my team this year. So we start to get a little lower. Instead of bringing him to this spot, now we're going to come farther down. We're going to come lower, okay, opening it up. We don't have Dwight Howard to roll to, but because this guy can commit to him a little bit, we would often duck in him a little bit, right, just to engage that defender. You're creating a situation where number 5 here has a choice between giving up the 3 or giving up the roll. We'll keep going with it a little bit. Good. This time we hit here. What we're trying to create is essentially a 2-on-3 situation. So instead of bringing in here, we brought this player really flat. Okay, where he can get it, he can one dribble there, he can skip across. This is very similar to a zone offense, really, where you can play out of it. Here's another one. So now you got a different coverage here, and what starts to happen is teams want to start to dictate where the player sends them. So they'll start to influence in one way or the other. So we see our point guard here trying to indicate what we want to do here, trying to set it up. We want this to what we call a twist action, which is they can flip the ball screen one way or the other. Notice the spacing here. So this one's really, really interesting. So we started doing almost an extreme version of this where we put him as flat as we possibly could. He's almost out of bounds here. And really, he can mess with this guy a little bit and actually stand behind him. This defender here has a choice now. We're creating a bad situation for him. Does he come up because he knows he has to help on a roll? Or does he stay all the way back on the baseline to create more space for the roll to happen? We go as flat as we possibly can here. So now we've switched the ball screen. We've actually tried to get the hedge to commit, and now we cross over and flip it, and he comes downhill again. Now, this player's read is go to wherever side the ball is going. So don't stay on one side, but move. And what we'll say is actually, our terminology is halo yourself. So at the point of the screen, actually go right underneath the rim or even farther under the backboard. So now this player loses sight of you. So he has the choice now of having to turn his head to face you and not being in a help situation anymore, or losing sight of you entirely, and now he doesn't know where you are. Here we see a little drop off there for a layup. He blows the layup, which makes my clip look bad, but our roller comes in and cleans it up.
Nice early trigger from Scully. You get
another action where we tried to run this a little bit here. We run almost what we want is a high-low ball screen here. Again, it was a really interesting example here where we were playing against a lot of switch action, and we started to see we wanted to capitalize as a high-low, but our fives couldn't throw the high-low pass. So we started to run an isolation situation where we would just use our threes, who were better passers.
Here from Scully again, his offensive.
To have this look at a high-low against a switch. Now, this guy didn't want to throw that. Maybe didn't like his seal, but now we can continue into the short action that I just showed you.
Times, but
into a dribble handoff, a short. Again, this player's running low on the baseline. This guy's got to deal with the help, loses sight of him.
The most, gets his squad started.
Pulls the player into a 15-foot jumper. Now, so I'm going to go back here and just detail that a little bit on a whiteboard now, so we can kind of just clear that up a little bit, because I think there's some interesting concepts that maybe we didn't try here. So this became the second short spacing. Again, we want to go as low as possible. What I play with a little bit, and I think we'd like to do more, and I'd encourage the coaches to do, and even just throw it out there to people on the call, is how far can you space this player? What would the ref call if you space them, say, here? Actually put them out of bounds. Now, I asked a couple of very experienced refs, what would you call if I put a player there? Is it 3 in the key? It's not 3 in the key. Is it legal? Some weren't sure. I would challenge that a little bit. Can we put them as low as possible? Now, you say to yourself, well, you're crazy, coach. Why would you put someone out of bounds? Well, you put someone out of bounds to create the maximum amount of space that you possibly can between the screen roll person and the logical defender, the easiest defender, right? This player 4, he can step in bounds whenever he wants to get a layup, but we want to put him as flat as he possibly can. We also, because what started to become a weakness of this action was the opposite of what I showed you in Steve Nash was, well, in our league, people were playing more in the gap, so we couldn't throw to that mid post. So Well, what happens now if they start to hedge? Your outlet pass, your short person is too far away to pass in the hedge. So how do you adjust to that? Well, we started adjusting to that by having our screen be right in the center of the floor, being more of a flat action. When you create a flat, you start to dictate how the defense can guard it. In this situation, it's very, very difficult to hedge because the point guard can just go the other way off of it and come downhill naked with no help at all, and that starts to become a real problem. So in a flat ball screen situation, they really only have two options, which is to drop or to switch. And in both those situations, we can either hit the replace guy and post up, we can hit the short man, we can get downhill a little bit and make plays at the free throw line area, we can start to capitalize on that. Again, it's starting to use your players in a better way. Again, this is a simple ball screen action where we can start to play it up a little bit. Now, I'll show you a different one. Here, we'll go back to my video. I'm getting a little quicker at this. Look out. All right. So, of course, one of the challenges you'll start to see is what happens when your non-shooter is a perimeter player. Really challenging. So in this case here, we get an open court ball screen here on our point guard, and they've scouted us. They decide they're not going to guard one player on our team who's a low percentage two-point shooter. You see it here. He comes all the way over. Point guard makes a nice little step through to hit him, and they don't really care about this shot because that guy didn't knock down shots. Again, my fault, my bad. I'm putting a player on the floor in a position where he cannot be successful. I shouldn't have him there. So how can we exploit this? Well, here's a short action here where now we're putting our guards here in this position. Okay, I'm putting my 5 here, the hardest place to say help off of because that's the direction the ball screen is going to. And now the helper is a small guy. So on this play, it becomes a little bit more of a Spain action, a little bit up screen, and we get a lob for a dunk. So let's look at why that happened. Well, what we started to do was exploit the imperfect roster of the other team, and we put their 5'10" guy as the primary help on our role. That causes a major problem for the opposition. Okay? So, again, let's look at a different spacing. Let's look at spread pick and roll spacing. So here's a pretty good example of spread pick and roll, Houston Rockets. Again, you don't have Houston Rockets roster. This is a problem for you, but they do. So you see real nice spacing here. These guys are getting down to the corners, as Coach Triano just talked about, right? We get an open court pick and roll, very similar to the one I just showed you, where it didn't work for us because we had a non-shooter on the floor. No one can really help. Creates an isolation situation of their biggest, slowest guy guarding the best one-on-one player in the league with the predictable results.
To the basket, steps inside.
So the question is, what do you do if you have 2 non-shooters? I think that's the key thing. So, I mean, what we started to do a lot this year was if the team had 2 non-shooters, we're just going to trap every pick and roll, and we're going to guard the roll with who's ever guarding the non-shooter. So now your only option out of the trap pick and roll is to throw it to the guy who can't shoot. Well, we'll live with that. We'll take that option every time. So we now have to look at, okay, a couple options of what we can run versus non-shooters. Here's an example first of non-shooter in the perimeter. Again, really stupid coach. This guy putting a non-shooter in the perimeter. Spacing's no good. It's crowded. Point guard jams it up. Turnover. Doesn't work. Okay. Let's see how we adjust it a couple years in advance. Now, we're flipping the ball screen here. Here's the player that was at least at this point in the year a lower percentage shooter. They have decided we're going to help off this player. Now we have a coordinated action where we're going to space them on the perimeter, but we know at the moment of truth, the point where the point guard breaks the free throw line we're going to get a hard cut and someone spacing the three-point line for a shot, and how we're going to take advantage of that. We're putting them in a situation where they can be successful. Take a look what happened here. Let's go back a little bit. Cuts to the rim, gets a dunk. Here it is in transition now. Again, non-shooter here. He cuts to the rim, collapses the defense. We get an open three. Unfortunately, don't knock it down in that case. Here's another example here. This one's, again, a spread pick and roll, but it's more on the side. We have two shooters and one non-shooter. We want the help is probably going to come off the non-shooter. We need that non-shooter to occupy space by attacking paint at the point of attack, not earlier. I think it's much tougher read if that player is just crowding the lane and playing. We want almost like an anti-pack line where they want to, in a pack line defense, they want to be in the help and recover. We want them to have to move. So we're going to position them in a situation where they're as far out as possible, and then we're going to cut into the spot when we need you in that spot. Notice the offside action here. We'll get this player cut, free somebody up. We'll get an open three on that side, okay? Our last one I'll throw at you here is, again, just something we did here to try to, again, we have two non-shooters on the floor, say our 4-5. We just eventually hit the trail here right away, let him bring the ball up the floor against a guy who's not going to pressure it, and ran a 4-5 ball screen, and that way the help wasn't there. And, of course, in a 4-5 ball screen, the defense is going to switch more often than not. So we encourage our guys in switchable situations just to try to reject the ball screen. Gets all the way to the rim and scores. So, I mean, that's just a few ideas there where I think we can take a look at that a little bit and, do some kind of creative things. My next thing would be creative things in zones, but maybe I'll pause here for a second. Is there any specific questions to spacing out a pick and roll before I go into zone stuff?
Yeah, a couple questions here, Coach, we're going to ask you. First, what guidelines did you give your perimeter non-shooters on their cuts? Were you worried about spacing issues with the roller jamming the same side on that? So that's the first question.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, we're gonna have, I like the non-shooters to be on the off side of the floor or the opposite where the guard is going. And if our point guard, first of all, sees that the non-shooter is on their side, we would encourage them to reject the ball screen, right? We want to attack a way to create the most amount of space between the ball handler and the cutter or the non-shooter, right? We wanted them to space and we wanted them to cut. A lot of times we start to say is when they break the defense, when they start to get even a half a step past the defense, or the absolute latest might be free throw line extended, breaking the three-point line, depending a little bit on one of the defensive coverages. A little bit of feel, there's a little bit where they got to kind of learn and feel a little bit. At least that was on the spread ball screen. On the short ball screen we talked about is what we wanted our short guy to be the baseline guy was we wanted him to be under the rim or under the backboard at the moment of the screen. So whatever side he went to, we would have him circle under and be under the backboard where his player cannot see both him and the action at the moment of the screen. We found that created the most confusion for the defense. Hope that answers the question. Any more?
Yeah, no, that's good. Did you classify players, whether guard or post player, let's say a 4-5 or a perimeter player, in that dunker spot? Or do you let them know, like, hey, you're non-shooter, you're going to be either cutting or filling a dunker spot? Do you change that with your personnel? Is that terminology you use?
Yeah, we change it very much with our personnel. We'll be running, hey, when we're running short, you're the short guy, you're the screener, and we'll tell guys, and it's basically based on who can hurt the defense more. It's not really a position thing at all. Sometimes we'll exploit it, and that short guy is really interesting because in the short action, the guy guarding the short becomes the primary help defender almost all the time. So sometimes we'll actually designate a matchup there where we'll put the other team's weakest defender or smallest player in that spot because that player is the one who has to jam the roll. And that we found created tremendous problems.
That's great, Coach. I think we're good right now. We'll let you carry on.
Sure. So now I'll go back and I'll do go back to the whiteboard a little bit here. One of the things I think, we started to look at a little bit, we ran this with the U16 national team last year, which internationally, of course, Canada, along with the US, generally has more athletes. And I just want to ask you can see my fast draw right now, is that right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah,
Perfect.
I can
Good.
see it.
Okay. So generally has more athletics, and we see a fair bit of zone internationally because of that. So I think, one of the things, we like to run zone wise, and I'll just throw this up here again. I'm just picking the simplest zone offense that I can here. But, this might be a classic 3 out, 2 in offense where, you might reverse the ball and X the bigs, right? And we're trying to look short corner. We're trying to look high post. We're trying to spread out the defense a little bit. Simplest zone possible, right? So I think sometimes we do that and we don't necessarily think about what we want there. And I think it's really important that we look at this here, and I forgot to fill one in there. But we want shooters in the perimeter. We want at least one person who can pass on the perimeter. And then we want someone who can finish inside as much as we can. And the positions, the 1, 2, 3, 4, need to be completely irrelevant to that. So one of the things we did last year with our national team was our point guard was probably our best, or maybe our second best overall player, was outstanding player. A kid by the name of Ryan Nemhard was absolutely, I thought, was the best point guard in the Americas last year. Just did a tremendous job, but he wasn't a great shooter. He was a competent shooter, but he wasn't a great shooter. And we started to play some small lineups where we played a kid by the name of Caleb Houston, who in my opinion is one of the best shooters in the country, at the 4 spot. So all we started to run was we're running our point guard at one of those X spots. So now we're creating mismatch situations. We're creating your 5 has to guard the best passer in the tournament at the nail, okay, one-on-one. And that just creates a massive problem. Again, we're just putting players in spacing situations where I would do things like that. So instead of having a situation like this, where we might have, a situation like this, we might have a situation like this. Now, in a traditional offense, maybe you'd move it around and you'd X those players, right? Or you'd go side to side. I wouldn't necessarily have the player just stand at the high post, right, and wait for the ball, but we want them off the move. But we would start to tell these players is, guys, we have a target player we're trying to attack as we move the ball. And that's our 1 in this case. Great. Our 5's a nice guy and everything, and he can dunk the ball and he can rebound. He's great there, but he's not our target. He's our finisher. I don't really want to pass on the ball, whether he's at the short corner or at the high post, but I do want to get our 1 the ball. And we started finding every time we got our 1 the ball at either the high post or the short corner, now real great things happen. Now they could keep their dribble alive. They could dribble around the 5 in that position with no concern of getting the ball stolen. They could hit a 5 diving. They could dribble out the other side and hit shooters, and that started to create real problems. I'll give you another example of how simple things you can do to just exploit zones, okay? Here's a good example here. So 1-2-2, 3-2 zone offense, pretty common high school zone. So instead of running a complicated zone offense, all we would want to do is we want to dictate the matchups. So again, we're creating spacing where we can do things. So here's an example here of where 1's just passed it and cut through to the side. We've simply reversed the ball to him, and we've created a situation where their 5, their biggest, slowest player, must close out on our quickest player, and we put our best shooters on that side of the floor. So now our 1's going to attack your 5 with our 5 diving and our 2 best shooters on the weak side. It's not complicated zone offense, but we're creating spacing where we dictate matchups in not a complicated way. All right. I know that my old college coach is really good at this, and he did a number of things I thought were pretty interesting with this. And we had at the time I was lucky enough, we had our 3-man was a 6'7" shooter, and anytime teams would play zone is we would just stand our 6'7" shooter at the spot where whoever the shortest person was guarding, and we would say, okay guys, we had 30-second shot clock back then, we're going to work and see if we can get a layup, and if we can't, we're going to throw the ball to our shooter, and he's always open because the 5'10" guy is the closeout on him, and he's going to shoot over top of him every time. So again, we're just creating situations where our players can be successful with small spacing alignments. So,
Coach, can we get a question here on that?
Absolutely.
Just a little bit on the 2-3.
Go
So one of the questions that came in, just if you had two non-shooters and they're in a usual 2-3, how would you use two non-shooters if they're perimeter players in that sense, or creative ways you could do that?
Great. So we've got two non-shooters here. I mean, again, it's more about the skill set of it. So back to our 2-3 here. I mean, in this case, where was it here? Is that my... Oh, here, I'll give you another example. I'll go back to this first and answer the question, actually. So in this case, our 1 was our non-shooter and our 5 was our non-shooter. So again, I'm putting our two non-shooters there, and I'm picking the most skilled of them to be the target player in that zone offense. But let me show you another example here, actually. So here's a zone O with two true bigs. They're not passers. It's hard for us to put them on the outside. No one's going to guard them. Where we started playing what we call 30 low, which is having two low guys. And we would just simply position them behind the defense, straddling the lane line as low as they possibly can. And we would run an action similar to this. So we would just reverse the ball. And now when the ball came to an offside here, we would flash a perimeter player into the post, in the high post, or a skilled player, and then have our point man flare behind them so that if this player came in to guard that, we might have a flare pass here. Now, the offside big, their job is to seal, in this case, the 3. So now the choice becomes, if he's creeping over, do I have a lob to the 4 or do I have a skip to the 3? Now, let's say they want to creep out here and not guard that. If our 2 can get the ball in the middle of the lane, this becomes really problematic here, because he has 2 people now to dump the ball down to into the short corner spot or into the dunker spot, right? Which creates a real problem. Now, let's continuity this here. We don't have either one. He bumps down. They've done a great job staying here. Now our 2, so I'll have to add some drawing here. Really simple. Our 2 can just pop out. We can reverse the ball through him to our 3, and now 1 can cut into that middle spot, and now 3 can flare over, right? Now we start to create situations where, let's say our 5 gets it, right? Now we've got this guy diving into here. He's got offside. 5 now has a diver in the middle. He's got a skip pass to the 3 for a shooter. Really simple, high school level zone offense where we can exploit, hey, I got 2 big stiffs who can't necessarily make plays in here. Let's put them where they're here. And their job now becomes either seal for a lob when the ball's away from you from the offside wing, or if they're going to guard you, pin in the offside wing to open up a skip pass for a 3. Things like that, right? So that would be my answer to 2 stiffs, I guess, in your offense.
That's great, Coach. And regarding the 3 guards, it doesn't matter the size of the guard that's cutting into the high post or to the nail, right? As long as they can pass and make plays out of that spot.
Relevant. Yeah, relevant. Doesn't really, honestly, small is sometimes better. If they catch it in the lane with a 5 on them, it's almost better. I mean, we're not trying to get them to shoot. They're just trying to get it there to dump off to people and find people. They can sometimes even keep their dribble alive, a la Steve Nash keeping his dribble alive, circling around, right? I mean, there's so much that you can do there and make plays out of it. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm gonna maybe sum it up, I guess, with one more point here, and I can take any other questions as well here as I kind of go back. But I would say this, and going back to my first story, and I looked at as I said, I had the opportunity to break down triangle offense and break down other offenses. When I was first coming up, I was assistant coach at University of Winnipeg with a guy named Bill Wedlick, and one of the roles that he had me do when I was a young assistant was during the games, I wrote down every single thing that the other team ran and kept kind of a log of it. And then I had to kind of, at halftime, come with him and look at, here's the most common ones, and how are we going to guard those actions? What are we going to adjust to? What are we going to guard? And I don't even know if anything I said resonated with the players. I don't know if they were able to pick it up. But for me, it was a tremendous professional development. By the end of 5 years of doing that, I had seen every single offense that everyone in the country ran, and I had at least considered what was the best way to attack that, or how are we going to guard that action? And it was tremendous development. And I would say this is, when you're trying to become good in the X's and O's as a coach, to me, at least from my perspective, there's kind of only one way to do it, and you can't skip any steps. And here I've kind of listed it here is, first of all, acquiring stuff. You got to research stuff, look at stuff online, talk to other coaches, see what other coaches watch a ton of video, get it all, steal as much as you possibly can. But just doing that doesn't make you a really good X's and O's coach, I don't think. You have to look at it and understand the why. Why are they running that? Why does it work? Why does it not work? What are we doing here that can be effective? What's the spacing that's required here that's important, and why is that spacing important? And then taking a look at some of those actions and saying, how would I adapt what that coach is running or what that team is running to my own roster? Would it work for me? Would it work for my personnel? Why wouldn't it work for my personnel? And then finally is, can you create your own stuff based on all that stuff learning? And again, I can't reiterate this enough. You can't skip steps. If you come into this thinking, I'm going to create my own stuff without absolutely looking at everything you have out there, your stuff's probably not going to be very good. And I've seen a lot of coaches do that and make that mistakes. Heck, I've made those mistakes, right? If you're going to try to, do things out of order and do even one before two, three before two, it's just not going to work. You're going to start to adapt that stuff before you really understand why someone's doing it. It's just not going to work. So that to me, more than just, I went through a simple short ball screen action, a simple spread ball screen. There's more stuff I could have given you out of spread ball screen too, where we ran pin down actions or different things to exploit spread ball screens or whatever, or different stuff out of zone. But again, I didn't want to add complicated offenses here. I more wanted to take you through, why were we doing what we were doing? How do I think you should be thinking about your own team in terms of how can we exploit what we've got and adapt offenses and that to run for your team. So again, I hope we kind of, those points resonate a little bit. And again, I'll take any questions at this point if you got any more.
Yeah, I'm going to fire a couple at you here, Coach. The first few clips you showed with, I think it was 10 screening for your ball handler. I think it was 10. Are those guard-to-guard screens for you? Would you classify him as a guard setting that screen for your point guard?
No. So we haven't done a ton of guard-to-guard screens.
Okay.
Honestly, we anytime we're doing guard-to-guard screens, oftentimes they're phantom screens because we know they're going to switch them, unless we're trying to exploit a mismatch or just get a different matchup, as people do now. Again, I mean, that's obviously the other ways, where you can kind of exploit things a little bit. But we don't do a ton of guard-to-guard, but we certainly do some of it. So look at that,
okay.
Former player asking a question. There you go.
Yeah. So to suit your team, how do you categorize your players?
I'm not sure what he's talking about in terms of I've started gone away with positions. We've gone, we've just gone big, little. We've done forward guard. We try not to do things. I oftentimes just try to teach our players. A really big part of my philosophy is trying to teach our players why we're doing what we're doing and understand the concepts and not just run the play. And I think for me, then I can have conversations with them about, hey, we want you in this position. We want you in the short spot. We want you in the shake. We want you here. And if they understand why we're doing it, then they got an easier concept of being in that situation. And a lot of times they can make those distinctions on the fly where, hey, I want to be over here, coach, because this is what I want to attack. And certainly as guys get farther along in our program, especially fourth and fifth guys, I start to have conversations with them about, hey, what do you think about this? Where do you see as the point of attack here? And how can we take advantage of that? And again, I'm just trying to stimulate their thinking so they have a better understanding of it, more than just the rote learning of, what we call paint by numbers offense, which I personally hate.
Okay. Going back to when you had guys in the dunker spot, whether it was guard or post, do you give them the freedom to make the read, whether they're seat cutting to the middle or behind the backboard, or is that something that you guys talk about if the defense goes strong side that you're making this cut, or is that totally a read for them?
No, so generally speaking, I don't like to have them on the offside. I just feel like it's too easy of a help situation, right?
Okay.
Where so you're talking about like this kind of action here is
right.
We would have. I don't want him to stay on this side of the floor. If the ball's coming to this side of the floor, I want to create that space for the 5 to roll into. If he stays here, his defender can too easily guard 2 in this situation. And I don't want that to happen. So I want to bring him here. What I have him do, though, is at the point of the screen, because as I say, on this one here, we have the screen in the middle of the floor, is he might start over here. But as the screen starts to happen, I want him to be here at the moment of the screen. Because I want, again, his player to have the hardest possible time to help in that situation. But, as you mentioned before, we could switch that. Could put 2 here. Put this guy here, right? Now we have the smallest possible helper in this situation, assuming it's the smallest possible helper, and we put him in the most disadvantageous, is that a word? I'm not sure, situation where he can help on the roll. So lots of questions. This is great. I'll be here all day. Woo!
They keep coming in here.
Sweet.
So late clock situations, do you have any specific calls or goals for your offense in late clock?
Do I have any specific calls or goals in late clock? Yeah, so a lot of times we'll have what we call end games. So very often much of the sets or motion or flow concepts that we have end in a couple of end game actions. We prefer an elbow entry, we prefer a mid-ball screen, we prefer a few things where late in possessions will be in that action. And so those are the reads that we most reliably rep, that we have the most 3-on-3 reps, we have most 5-on-5 reps out of, where guys can just make simple reads out of it. And a lot of times they're those short action situations where we can start to make plays. So